7 hours.
Okay, 7 hours. Okay. Okay. Not terrible.
So it's 5 o'clock here.
Okay. Okay. Yeah, that's not.
Yeah.
All right. I am super excited to welcome to the Damn Digest Terrell Jermaine Starr, who I have been on TV with, been following for a very long time. Amazing foreign affairs correspondent, someone who is an expert in Ukraine-Russia relations, who, Terrell, you DM'd and you said, look, I'd love to have a conversation because folks have to understand what is happening in Ukraine and what is happening in the United States and what is happening around the world are interconnected. And I think that we often, because of virtue of geographically where America is situated, but also ideologically where America is situated, remain in our silos and only care about what's happening in our front door, outside of our front door. So right now, you said you're in Western Ukraine, the farthest west that you can be. You've been there for how long now?
So in total, I've been in Ukraine since 2009 when I was a Fulbright grantee. The same program that the Trump administration is attacking. We'll get into that and why that matters for us because a lot of Black people get their foreign policy experience and education through State Department money, which is becoming more and more unavailable. But I've been here since 2009 on and off. So I spend 6 months out of the year here each year. And so on this trip, I've been here for the past 2 months, and I'm covering the war in Ukraine, plan on going out to the front lines, we're close to where the fighting is in August. And so I'm covering not only the military perspective, but also how this war is impacting society from a demographic standpoint, from a psychological standpoint, from an economic standpoint, and how society is responding to how the West is applying pressure to Russia and supporting Ukraine through various military and economic aid.
So it has been 3.5 years, which is mind blowing because, like many people watching, I remember when Russia's invasion started, when the attacks started, when we were seeing people leave strollers at the border and leave, backpacks and just take what was on their body and go to the nearest border to cross to get out of harm's way. And, I think that our media did a very interesting job during the beginning of this war where they said, they're just like us. Like things like this don't happen to people like us. And us who are Black and brown, we're like, whoa, 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 whoa. Like, where is that kind of empathy? Where is that lens when it is happening to people in Muslim nations and African nations? Like, where is that sense of they're just like us and are undeserving, right, of having to flee their homeland? So when this began, and I know it's so, long ago at this point, but Terrell, like, how do you think that the media told this story? And has there been a shift at all in the last 3.5 years as to how this story has been delivered to Americans and folks around the world?
Well, thank you for having me here. So here's the biggest irony in everything that you said, which I totally agree with, is that even the majority white international media did not culturally cover Ukrainians as well as they could have, because even though they were saying that these Ukrainians are like us, they look like our children, our mothers, our sisters, there was a lot of racism in that 100%. But there was also a lot of ignorance because the type of brutality and decades of Russian colonialism that's impacting Ukraine, that doesn't appropriately apply to the privilege of whiteness exactly within this part of the world, right? And so that's why when these people were being attacked, this whole thing of them leaving their homes, this idea that it can't happen to them. Well, over the course of hundreds of years, it has happened to them, but you haven't been characterizing it correctly because one, for much of Ukraine's history, they've been under the Soviet Union. And so 30 years ago, what roughly 30 years ago is when they had their independence and they were able to develop their own identity. Um, but has that shift that you're talking about, has there been a shift in the coverage? I don't think so. And the reason why is because you have the same white journalist telling the same story from through a colonial lens, first of all. And so you
Mm,
will notice that a lot, yes, that's the whole thing. White people can have a colonial lens to quote unquote other white people. And they do this by looking at things through the frames of Moscow. And so things like when I think about your conversation about coverage, there are two things that happen in Black American history, two nadirs in Black American history and Ukrainian history. Goes back to 2014 with the uprisings of Ferguson that
mhm,
happened in the fall of 2014. And then earlier that year, here in Ukraine, you had what was called the Maidan, the revolution of freedom. And so both of these movements exercised the use of social media to tell their own stories. And
mm.
so, if you notice, yeah, very similar, and both of these movements came as a direct result of police violence. A lot of people don't know that Ukraine's movement in 2014 was because of police violence. The hundred or so people who were killed there were killed by the state. They were killed by security forces of Ukraine. And so that's something that white people and like the Ukrainians and Black Americans have in common a lot. But people are not drawing those parallels because there's not enough people like us doing it. Because if there were, then you would have a greater context and a less racist description of what's happening to them. Now, what's ironic, another irony is that while they were kind of fawning over I would say fawning is the wrong word. I would say they were really highlighting the tragedy of Ukraine. You had a whole bunch of black folk who were trying to leave, and they were treated like dogs.
Right, right.
And you also and so that's work that I'm doing. That I'm going to be publishing on Substack in the next couple of months, just kind of retracing where those people were. And so this idea that there was no racism happening and these people being silenced in many ways, Ukraine was silenced for decades because they were under the thumb of Moscow, and all of your scholars are going to Russia, and they didn't have to think about Ukraine. But what was both the beauty of all of this and drawing these links is that 2014 was the year that people used social media to claim their own voices. What's unfortunate, however, is that I'm really trying to get Ukrainians to really fight to really fight against this pull to integrate into whiteness themselves, right? That's what I'm working to do with them, but also with black folk to realize that yes, these people, once they move into the United States, they are white, but that doesn't define their experience over here. And our media did not do a good job of rolling that out at all.
I think so. This is just it's the parallels. This is why your work and your voice is so critical, because the parallels that you're able to draw through the lens of being a Black man that is steeped in understanding this region of the world, Ukrainian life culture as it relates to their identity being pulled outside of Moscow, being pulled outside of this Russian manifest destiny type of lens, like this individual nature, this quest for freedom, which seems to be something, again, like you're saying, we as Black people have in common. When you say to try and get them to not submerge themselves in whiteness, but we have always whiteness has always been expressed as the point center of power. And your proximity to that then is somehow often equated with your level of safety. And you're talking to a people that are trying to actualize and self-determine. And how do you get them not to fall into the trap of whiteness when that is globally perceived as safety?
one Ukrainian at a time. And it is so hard because it's not a lot of people who are specialists. So you have a lot of Black folk who will come here for a couple weeks, 6 months. That's a long time. But this field, Russia, East European and Eurasian studies in the academic world, but just Eastern European politics or European politics in general, it doesn't produce Black people to be in this part of the world. Like it just doesn't. So anytime I went to the State Department, I was speaking, back during the Biden administration. I went to the White House 3 times, right? To do briefings, from the ground. And I remember I was speaking at the State Department specifically, and there was a section called the policy section. And this is the most senior level department of career staffers that give their expert opinions to the Security Council, Oval Office, etc. And it was a Black woman that invited me. And it's always the case. Anytime I get into these rooms, it's usually a Black woman. It's Black men sometimes, but 90% of the time a Black woman. And and so those feeders, so she brought me in, but think about how many other people. So the feeder system is just very low. So it's like me talking, it's me versus hundreds of white people who come to this
Yeah.
part of the world and don't talk about racism at all, right? In one sense, I stand out. In another, it's difficult because there's not enough people reinforcing what I say. So in the way that I drive it home to them, I spoke at Taras Shevchenko University in Kyiv, which is the biggest university in the country, also has the largest foreign affairs department in all of Ukraine. I spoke with their graduate students, and I was invited for 2 lectures and to talk about Trump and his impact on Ukraine. What I did, drawing parallels again, was I brought up a tweet by Donald Trump Jr. in which he referred to Ukrainians as the international welfare queens. Okay? Yes, he did this. When Zelensky asked for more money, which they legitimately needed, and Trump Jr. went on Twitter and said, they are international welfare queens. And we know Reagan popularized that term when he ran in
Right.
1976. And
Right.
you refer to people as the quote unquote ghetto Black woman with
Yep.
the fur coat driving around in a Cadillac in Chicago. And so that's how they describe Ukrainians. So they racialized them. He racialized them. But then that's more. The Marjorie Taylor Greene of the world, the MAGA contingency within Congress, all describe Ukrainians as people who are just digging into our pockets. We're very familiar with that language. And so I showed them example after example after example after example of this. And during my lecture to them, and it illuminated them, and they were shocked, and they were saying, Terrell, we didn't know that America still had all these issues. I said, listen, the racism and white supremacy that's directed towards us, they're targeting it towards you because ICE is not only picking up Haitians and people from Mexico, they're also picking up Ukrainians, and I know this because I talked to them. So, so they thought that their whiteness, they had the complexion for the protection, and they don't. And so they're in this very precarious situation now where they need to do some deep soul searching about how they fit into this white supremacist society because at one point they didn't have to think about it. But Trump is showing them if you're no use to me, I will dispose of you too, because unlike South Africa, there are not enough Black people in Ukraine for him to have a grudge against and for him to make up lies about white people are being attacked. So South Africans are going to get the privilege that you as Ukrainians don't have. So it's important to let them know how how unreliable whiteness is and speaking to them on that human level and they start to listen, but one Ukrainian at a time, because it's hard, sis. It's hard.
Yeah, I
It's
mean,
difficult.
it's I think that one, it's an extraordinary lesson to understand how whiteness is weaponized against white people. And I think that oftentimes like, again, when we talk about racism and the construct of racism, and it was, Heather McGee's book, the Sum of Us, when talking about the fact of the economic and also moral and spiritual cost of racism for white people as well as Black people and people of color. And I think that it's something that they don't really understand because of the narrative that has been created around racism, that is something that is largely this physical structure of crosses burning or of lynchings or of what have you, but you're not looking at the reverberations and the nuances that have happened. And I think that now, and I wonder to you, Terrell, like, you're having this conversation 3.5 years in. We now are 6 months into the second Trump regime, which has already shown itself to be wildly different than the first regime, right? And it is at a place of trying to reestablish and reinforce white national power in this country as a way of creating a new axis of evil that now the United States is at the center of. Can you talk to us about, like, the necessity of Trump for that larger axis of evil that is steeped in white nationalism, that, again, we're talking about whiter nations like Hungary, like Russia, like France, like these places. And so when we think in the United States about white nationalism, again, we think about white versus Black or white versus brown. But can you formulate it for us in terms of how we are seeing it um, reimagine itself in this century, reformulating around these countries that were once considered like allies?
Right. This is really a good point. And so essentially, what we are learning when you bring up Viktor Orban in Hungary, you think about Marine Le Pen in France, or you think about the Alternative for Deutschland in Germany, which came in second place with more than 20% of the vote in the last parliamentary elections. And in other countries, even on the border here, about an hour drive away, you have Slovakia, you have FICO there who's doing the same thing there. What people are realizing is that authoritarianism wins. And particularly in Hungary, what they do is, and people don't think that redlining doesn't happen. It just, we think about it for Black folk, but redlining, first of all, it's not just Black folk. People, poor people are redlining in the United States too. Poor white people are redlining. That's a whole nother thing. But particularly in Hungary, politically, Viktor Orban has been redlining his electoral power in that country for years. And so authoritarianism works because in democracies, you have to wait on people to make decisions. You have to debate people. You have to make solid points. And so what's so important about us to really draw these things together is that one thing that white supremacists around the world will concede is that they may not agree with each other 100%, but what they do agree upon is that their whiteness is under threat. They feel like they like Trump, like there's a fear of the browning of America. There is a fear of predominantly ethnic people in, across Europe, like white dominated peoples are under attack. And so that's why you have this big push against particularly Muslims entering the country, particularly Africans entering the country, even though they colonized these places. And we can say that this is the chickens coming home to roost.
Right.
We could say that, which they have not reconciled. And so instead of integration, which has been proven to work, integration programs, which has been proven to working with advocates on the ground across these countries, are saying the power comes in isolationism because what they realize is just like the United States, Hungary, across Europe, is that if I can blame that other person, I don't have to think about myself. I don't have to think about my own feelings, my own racism. And what's dangerous for us as Black folk is that we are so under engaged in foreign policy is that we don't understand that all of these powers around the world are not only ganging up against black people, they're ganging up against brown people. And so all of these inter-ethnic fight, this fight that we're doing with each other, the white supremacists really don't care, even, whether it's black people or Latino people or Asian people. It's the white supremacist elites versus the rest of us. That's what they're thinking about, which is why Trump has no problem saying, I could just throw these Ukrainians out, 200,000 Ukrainians out. I don't care if they have a war going back home, but they don't have a house going back to, because he never cared about them. He did no more than Republicans across the South don't care about the poor white people that get on opioids and get addicted and don't do anything to regulate the companies that produce these drugs that are pumping millions of pills into their communities. And so globally, it's the same thing. And we as black folk, it's one of the disservices of our media ecosystem and the lack of diversity in foreign affairs is that you don't have enough people on the ground who are simply looking around and saying, I see this trend, I see this trend,
Right.
I see that trend. And so if you could just think about the power of the black newspaper back in the 20s and 30s and 40s, and just imagine if we had a similar economic engine, in which you have black folk that are just sitting around, we could at least inform our people, right? But that has a whole lot to do with the fact that the digital world has kind of really sparsed out a lot of our attention spans. And so we have to look so many places for so many of our sources. So it's a bit different in the digital world versus analog world. But yeah, white supremacists are just convening internationally because they feel like their whiteness is being devalued. And we as black people and people of color, that fighting works to their advantage,
Hmm.
works to these white supremacists' advantage. And if we don't really all collectively get our act together, then we're going to continue to be sucked up and ensnared by this white supremacist authoritarianism that's going to eat us all alive.
I want to bring this up because there are multiple questions that are coming up in the chat right now that are about, well, I want to know, then they're asking you, I want to know what the Ukrainians think about Black people and think about Africans, because as somebody had mentioned, and they might have joined late, that they remember in 2022 Black people trying to leave Ukraine and being shut down at the borders, which you spoke to when we started.
Mhm,
There is this sense, though, and I don't want to put words into the person's mouth who offered
mhm,
this thought. There is this
mhm,
sense that if you don't care about me, I'm not going to care about you. So if the sense is that you're here, you're in Ukraine, and you're working to both understand what is happening in Ukraine, but also educate them about how they're being used as pawns in this kind of white nationalist reemergence and uprising, and that their whiteness is not going to protect them. And I hear the undertone of that question is, well, if they don't care about Black people and they're just as racist or what have you as white Americans are, then essentially fuck them. Right? Like that's what I that you know what I'm saying? So I'm like, so talk to us about, that kind of what I would call a zero sum mentality that isn't going to serve us in the long run. But what is your response to that?
well, the reason why I'm on is that I want to answer those questions. And first of all, that sentiment is absolutely it's legitimate, first of all. And let me add on to that. So some of the work that I'm going to be publishing in the next 2 or 3 months actually confirms a lot of people's sentiments and their concerns. So for example, I've been talking to a lot of Black Ukrainians who left the country, and what their journeys have been like, because I also help white Ukrainians flee the war. And I'll just give you my first, like the personal example that'll tee up the rest of people's thoughts, because I want to bring it home to why should we still care, right? So for one, when I went to the border and I was dropping people off, so that they can get in line and then leave Ukraine, I saw the Black people and the Indians. It was a lot of Black folk, a lot of Africans, a lot of Indians on the other side of the line. I put I actually stood in the Ukrainian line, and the people told me to stand in the Ukrainian line because I have a U.S. passport. Okay, so basically, when the border guards would come up to me, the Ukrainians around me would say, "Amerikanets, Amerikanets, Amerikanets, American," and he left me alone. Now that was interesting. So there was, for me, there was passport privilege there, 1000%. And in fact, there was a guy from Ghana standing right in front of me with this Ukrainian wife. And what was really interesting about that dynamic was that the wife saw what was going on in the other line, and she was like, "He's not going there." And so she just had this defiance of, if you could, like, this face, if you mess with my man, it's going to be a problem. And so he technically was supposed to be over in the other line. And quite frankly, I was too, because I'm not Ukrainian, I'm not a woman, but I was helping women to flee, right? So there was a whole bunch of this kind of unofficial, just allowing certain people just to hang in this line. So definitely want to announce that part. Now going back to the Africans, it's a bit, so yes, when people were leaving, so if they were getting on the trains, they were definitely pushed out. What's true about what's so on one hand, people were prioritizing women and children. And so during a war, that doesn't excuse a racism, because I think this is important, because people rarely get this information out, and it's really important to kind of lay it out. But during war, you want to get people who don't have the ability to fight out. Like, that's just what you do. And in that situation, though you see the very best and the very worst in people, and the
Mhm.
very worst came out in extreme racism. It absolutely happened. And so, in the effort to get the women and children on the trains, they were, people, as opposed to simply saying, you need to stay in line. There is some orderly process, and we're going to put you in this situation or that, or in this public transport. It was chaos. There was no planning or anything. A lot of people also said that their embassies, the African embassies that were in Kyiv, did not help them. And so
Mm.
and so there's a concern, because the thing is that when you have these types of evacuation situations, all of the embassies and the governments need to be involved as well. And so so every single leader in African community I spoke to said that they were not really helping people in ways that they should have. And so that doesn't excuse the racism, but what it does do is that it lets you know that the Ukrainians authorities, the train authorities, transport authorities, were pressured with these groups of people that they were not prepared for. So, for example, when Russia invaded Georgia in 2008, for example, I was a graduate student, so the embassy had buses that they chartered to get Americans out, right? And so usually when it comes to emergencies like this, the embassies are supposed to play a bigger role. Going back to the racism, these are stories that I've been told personally. One of the stories was when the African student or whoever did get on the train, you know, you saw all this outpouring of support where people are bringing food to to the train stops, to the to bus stops, what have you. And when a black person would put their hand out, some person who's handing the food would slap their hand away and say, "My this food ain't for niggas." Yeah, that happened. And then also you had situations where people are just verbally abused, like, you N words are not supposed to be here, this, that, and the third. That happened a lot. And what also happened was when people would get to the border, there was just it was really like there was a lack of cultural sensitivity just in general. And so them not understanding or understanding like how this is going to make them look after the fact, they were completely aloof to it. Another point I want to make up is that the racism so the border situation, and I think this is where Ukraine gets a lot of blame and they don't need to get it, right? Like where they don't deserve it. So, in order, so the capacity, or I would say not capacity, in order for anyone to leave the country, they need to have the right paperwork in order to enter.
Hmm.
And what that requires is that for these European Union countries to treat all people as refugees. And they didn't do that. Okay,
Right.
so that's the issue, right?
Yep.
So that's the fundamental problem. So when you think about this situation at the border, everybody thought that it was a Ukraine thing, and that's just that part you can't blame on them. The racism getting up to the border because human beings are going to be ignorant and the racist. Yeah, put that on them. But at the border, situation is a bit trickier because Poland, which received the most Ukrainians, they were not giving out the same visas to Africans as refugees versus Ukrainians. So the Ukrainians got visas that would last 6 months, a year, what have you. Whereas with the Africans, they had like a 1 week or 2 week transit visa. And so one specific example was I went to talk to a brother, a Nigerian in Warsaw. And when I went to his front desk, there was a Ukrainian woman there to greet me. I spoke to the brother. He's the owner because he just opened up the his it's a beauty salon for African braids, all this other stuff. And he said, I'm hiring a lot of Ukrainians because those are the people that the Polish government allows me to hire. So he said that because of the laws that were set up for employing refugees, I couldn't even hire my own people. So
Damn.
yeah. So that's what I'm saying. So that's what happens there. Now, if you go to Germany, for example, the way that they handle refugee status is from state to state. It's not centralized. And it's the same situation. I'm speaking to African students right now that have to renew their visas every 2 months, every 3 months, whereas Ukrainians, they automatically got work visas, they got on state support, just real easy, right? So the way that European Union countries treated these Ukrainian refugees versus the African ones was just very different. And of course, we have to think about race in that regard. Now, here's an exception. One of the exceptions was Portugal. So Portugal is pretty much really far west in the country. However, if you could get to Portugal, Portugal gave everybody the same visa. And they were particularly interested in African students because they have an aging population and they needed medical professionals in the state. And so they were actually encouraging these people. So they got in, with full scholarships, work visa, et cetera. So there were exceptions to that. And so going back, bringing it home to why we ought to care. You know, I think one thing as a black person, I have to ask myself, why is my black ass over here? Like I think about that all the time. I mean, because it's because I feel I tell people it's a calling because look, I was born and raised in Detroit, which statistically is the largest black city in the United States of America. And the other side of my family is from New York. So I got Detroit as a child, and I got Brooklyn in my adulthood. So, and whereas New York has the most black people in the city, in this city, in this metropolitan area versus any part of the country. So I had this very black HBCU bred experience, and then all of a sudden I'm over here trying to tell white folk essentially how to be better people. And I can only just say that is, but here's the thing, like I can only, so journalism and expertise isn't the only thing that drives what I do because here's the reason why we ought to care. We can't afford not to
Yeah.
because we have to think about ourselves. So that's the whole thing. But that's the way that black folk have always been throughout our lives. So it's not like us saying, okay, we're just going to hold our hands through it. Like I said earlier, white supremacists are galvanizing around the idea that their whiteness is being devalued and they coming after all of us. Okay. Like I s- and that's and like I was telling some a Ukrainian guy who's dealing with immigration issues now, you came over to America and you ain't never think about no black stuff. Because he was saying he's afraid to go outside because he's afraid ICE is gonna pick him up. I said, listen, that's every black man, every
Yep.
black person talks to their kid, forget about ICE, the popo, the police. But see, they don't have black people that they're talking to. So as being an immigrant is a very precarious thing because you're coming to a new country and you're trying to fit in, and so that's what they're dealing with just from a human level. But the downside to that is that they never have to spend time with us. They never, 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 never do. And quite frankly, that's going to be their downfall
Yeah.
because we know what's up. And so the good Lord brought me here because he gave me the emotional bandwidth to
Mm-hmm.
endure all of the static that all of the people in the chat are rightfully saying, why should I give a fuck? They are 1000% correct because to feel that way. But what I'm saying is that if we don't, we've always had to give a fuck.
I
And
like that's what I think to myself. I'm like, one, why would you be there? Because Black people always endure. And not only always endure, but always survive. And we've been able to turn that survival into thriving generation through generation. And why is that? Because we don't have the luxury to ignore and pretend that what is happening around us isn't happening. Right? Like I remember there's an interview that James Baldwin gave where he said, like, white people don't know Black people because they've never had to. But
right,
all we've had to do is know about white people for our safety. Know where you were, know what you were doing and what you're up to. And so I think about that, right? I think about what he was saying in terms of the awareness that comes by virtue of being Black to our detriment would ignore what is happening in Ukraine and what is happening globally, right? Because it is happening on our front doorstep. And people are saying, well, I'm going to flee the United States. I need to go someplace that's safe. Then you need to know
where you
what
gonna
the
go?
fuck is going on, right? Like you need to know what is happening because what's happening in America isn't just happening in America. It is happening everywhere. What's happening in Ukraine isn't just happening in Ukraine. What Israel is doing to Palestinians isn't just like it is an interconnected, right? Like strangling
I
of trying to
gotta
oppress.
tell you about Palestine because I went.
Please.
All right, so look, tell you something about Palestine. So, and did you go? Did you go to the West
Yeah,
Bank?
I did. I did in 2015.
Okay, okay. So let's share notes. I'm gonna tell you what I'm gonna tell you. This is gonna connect to Ukraine. So I went in 2023. It was the most dehumanizing thing that I've seen in all my life.
Yep.
I felt physically ill. And it's one of the things that even when I think about it, I physically feel ill thinking about how these people are being treated. And so I was told not to post anything while I was there because the Israeli authorities may, say something to you, whatever, whatever. All right. So I didn't. I went to like the black neighborhoods in East Jerusalem, and I went around that community and spoke with folks. And I went to Hebron, all
Yep.
these other places, right? Which was the worst which was like a horrible situation for me because a lot of the settlers are there,
Yep.
and so what was really depressing was when I walked down the street. I was walking towards a checkpoint, and this checkpoint was directly in front of a house that settlers took over. I mean, just told the Palestinians or
Get the fuck out.
the
Yep. Yep.
They describe them as Arabs. Get the fuck out, right? Get the fuck out. So this Palestinian dude was like trying to sell me something, and being in New York, you got people telling you trying to sell you stuff all the time. You just keep it moving. But this guy particularly, it really got to me because he said, "You see that place right there? You see that little with that door? That's where I used to live, and I can't be here anymore because they threw me out." And he's like, "I'm trying to take care of my family, da 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 da." And I said, "Oh my God," because when we got to the checkpoint, I was able to walk past it, and he didn't. Now, come on now, like we all we black folk, and our parents told us about where they couldn't go, where they couldn't walk, where their black bodies couldn't exist. So how is it in any sane world where my black, formerly Jim Crowed body, enslaved, ancestral body, how can I go and step foot on someone else's land that it didn't belong to me, but I have the privilege of doing it because I got a fucking American passport, right? So, like I'm still working on ways to kind of think about that experience and write about it. Because right now I'm just talking about it with you, and but when I kept that, okay, so here's the thing. When I started tweeting about this when I landed in New York, in 3 days, I lost 50,000 followers on Twitter. 50,000. Okay. I had all of these people from the Kissnet going at me. I had 3 different articles from Israeli lobby connected media organizations calling me an anti Semite. 3 articles, 3 fucking articles. Okay. And all I'm saying is that apartheid is wrong. Things that more than a dozen organizations have said. And what really gets to me is you got all these black folk that are taking APAC money and ain't saying shit about it. Like, to me, that is unforgivable. If someone primaries Hakeem Jeffries, I'm voting for that person.
100%.
Listen, there is zero justification for this. Zero. You cannot be black and stand by and not say anything about these Palestinian babies being butchered and killed. When I was there, I saw police randomly take little kids, just yank them, yank them. I don't have children, but I would think if somebody yanked my kid, I need the best lawyer because I'm just you know it ain't gonna work out well. From the Wolverine will come out of me, like it just would,
I, I,
right?
I,
But these people. But let me get to the point. I'm gonna bring it up because here's the thing, right? So you see this all the time, and I see these Negroes in Congress talking about defense of Israel and this, that, and the third, and people going at Memdani for being anti-Semitic, you know, and Eric Adams, who was flued out by Turkey,
mm-hmm,
okay, who was flued out by
mm-hmm.
Turkey, right? All these black folk stepping and fetching for Israel. And I have the audacity to say, you know what? Not only is that wrong, it's disqualifying. So, in addition to the people that I lost on Twitter, I had all the people from Ukraine saying, you know what? We thought that you were smart on Ukraine, but you don't know anything about what's going on in Israel. You don't know the history. I said, look. Do y'all know about Ukraine? Ain't none of y'all go to graduate school like I did because I know I got 2 master's degrees in this shit. I mean, I'm here studying the language. I know you don't know as much as me, but I never required you to know because what Putin is doing is wrong. He's committing war crimes. He's kidnapping children. They are committing SA, against women. Like that's one story that I'm working on, one that I did a podcast on it, and they're actually engaging in cultural genocide, elimination of language, all of that stuff. But when I talk about these brown babies, then you want to act like I'm your mascot that you can just control whenever you want to. No, screw you. So I'm bringing us all home because when you are morally consistent, one, someone who is morally consistent like me can never work at the New York Times. Let's just get that
I
straight.
know that's right.
Someone like me, right, me, no, because I call all of it out. Every ignorant ass white person and every ignorant ass black person. I don't like any of it. And so so where we are is when we're dealing with war, because like I said, I cover it, and there's I've almost been killed a couple of times. Like I understand war, like it's extremely violent, and I respect the idea of if you have to go, if standing up to Putin and what that potentially means. I understand it firsthand. What I also understand is that when Malcolm X, before he died, he was talking about going to the UN to appeal about to appeal the UN over the abuse of Black Americans. Like that type of Black internationalism is what's missing in our
Mhm.
politics. And I feel like what I'm here is to down how that we have to be in our in our observation of politics and what's happening in the world, because if we are going to be
Yeah, yeah. We're in a moment of needing to have collective care and needing to have a deep understanding about each other. And he's frozen, and because we're ugh, hold on. Folks, I'm hopeful that Terrell can bounce back in because he's in far west Ukraine. We had a really good connection for close to an hour. So I'm really hoping that he can pop back in. This was probably one of the most important conversations. Oh, you're here waiting? All right, Terrell, hold on. I'm gonna try and add you again. Okay. We're gonna wait for Terrell to pop back in. Um, this is one of the most important conversations because it is about collective care. Oh, he's coming. Let's send good internet waves and hope you reconnect. Okay. I'm like, yay.
I was off for a second. Yeah,
Yeah.
I missed you for a second. So one thing I've been trying, like I have a VPN on, and I don't know if that's interrupting in any way, but at any rate, I'm back on.
You're back on. I was saying, when you froze for a moment, I was saying that the most important thing, this conversation is so important for so many reasons. But what I take from it is the need for collective care. Like, is the need for collective care at a moment when we are being divided, conquered, and put against one another, which has always been the structure and the format of white nationalism. It is to divide, conquer, and destroy. And I think that for me, I wanted to share briefly, and then I'll give you the last words, is that I'm not a foreign affairs person, right? So when I was given the opportunity, 10 years ago to go to Israel and Palestine, because of, my progressivism, how vocal I have been about a range of things domestically, I said, I got to go, right? When else am I going to have the opportunity to go? And at that time, I was completely and totally ignorant of what was this perceived Israeli Palestinian conflict. And I tell you, Terrell, from the moment that I stepped off of that fucking plane and stepped foot into Israel, I had never been more aware of bigotry, racism, hatred, apartheid than I've ever seen in my life. There are things that I saw there 10 years ago that gave me nightmares for months and months and
Hmm.
months. There were times
Hmm.
of going out to dinner and we would be whispering to each other, not knowing who was listening. There was this sense of, for the first time, like, how, and I had the same experience that you did. We were going to a home, one of the last homes of a Palestinian person. We're in like the West Bank, in an area that had been totally overtaken by settlers, and we're being flanked by the IDF, like, who is like, what are you doing here? Why are you here? And, and we're going to these people's home. And it was the first time I'm looking around and I had seen the Star of David used as a hate symbol on this person's door, on this
Hmm.
Palestinian person's door. And I said, what the fuck is happening here? Like, what? And I was so taken aback at the, like, I had never experienced Jim Crow. My family is from Jamaica, did not come to this country and to the United States until the 1970s. Like, the Black American experience has never fully been my experience because my family are immigrants to this country. So
Hmm.
to my understanding of Jim Crow was through books and then through friends' families and what have you. To experience it firsthand and not experience it because I had the privilege of being an American with a blue passport was so fucking unnerving. And I was told when I returned and I wanted to write, I was told, Danielle, you will not have a career. Your career will be over
Yeah.
if you think that you are going to go on television, if you're going to write for the outlets that you write for and talk about this issue. Your career will be over. And I wrote one piece because, again, I'm not a foreign affairs expert. So I also felt like I could only write it through the vantage point of being a Black queer woman and like through the lens of hate and discrimination and white nationalism, not through the lens of the foreign affairs, whatever you want to say. And I tell you that the pushback that I received as you don't know, right? And I'm just like, I'm
Yeah.
Black. I'm like, I fucking know, right? Like, I don't need to have multiple degrees in this area to understand what the fuck is happening here. And I think that that has been the way to divide people, right? And the way for them to say this isn't my business because you're constantly told, "Oh, you don't know. You don't really understand. This is decades upon decades. This is a centuries long conflict. You don't understand this region of the world." And you're like, you know what the fuck hate looks like. Okay. You know what apartheid looks like. So you don't need to have a degree in order to understand right from wrong. And that's where I think that to some extent we're finding ourselves now, Terrell, is where a lot of people are looking around and being like, no, I actually know right from wrong. I actually know what is supposed to, how humans are supposed to treat one another and what is acceptable and what is fucking not. And when it's not, I need to speak out, right? Regardless of whatever the risk is going to be, I need to say something. And so that's where I find myself, and that's where I'm thinking that this push that we are seeing, this revival of white nationalism, this oppressive authoritarian force is coming in so hot and so strong because more people are waking the fuck up. Because more
Yeah.
people are questioning, because more people are seeing that the larger game of this divide and conquer, and they're saying, I don't want to play.
Right on. And so when people tell us you don't know enough about the conflict, you haven't gone long enough, you don't know the history. That's pretty much what white folks who came to the South to protest were told, right? You don't know enough about the black folks. You don't know enough about the colors, the Negroes. They were calling us worse things, right? So this is a common story that folks are told anytime they want to confront white supremacy, racism, sexism. You don't know enough about it. What's happening right now, particularly in the case of Israel, is that no one can longer say that just because you're critiquing the state, that you're criticizing Jews. And so, one thing that the Israeli lobby has done a very good job of is conflating the two. And
Yep.
people are not going for it anymore. And so, literally, you have the Israeli lobby is just being completely shook. They're shook right now. That's what's happening. Of course, this is manifesting in abuse of universities, kicking students out, suspending them, Trump targeting them. But ultimately, that's what's happening. People are shook. And, the biggest irony, and I say this as somebody who's, I'm a believer in that. I go to Concord Church of Christ in Brooklyn, New York, Black Liberation Theology Church. I went to it because it's a queer affirming institution. It's a place that's welcoming to me, daughters queer, the whole 9 yards. The pastor was trained by theologian James Cone, who is the founder of Black Liberation Theology, and we he talks a lot about foreign affairs in his sermons. But one of the things that people are not realizing is that all the irony of white evangelicals in particular, not just them, not only them, but particularly white evangelicals that are standing as like spiritual bulwarks of Israel. The biggest irony is that they don't necessarily want an Israel for Jews, they want to replace them. Like that's the biggest thing that people are not really thinking about out here. Um, and so it's the same tiki torch carrying white folks that were saying Jews are not replace us.
Yep.
Go to those very churches that support Israel, and that's what people are not connecting. And so again, this goes full circle to, you know, we I think about my HBCU experience, and the white evangelicals were some of the people who founded the black schools, along with formerly enslaved black folk. And what people don't want is everybody to wake up. The poor white people, the poor Latino people, the poor everybody going against the elites because it's more of us than it is of them. That's why I'm trying to bring everything full circle when I talk about Ukraine. Me doing the work that I do, and thank you for giving me the platform because we need each other because it's not a lot of us where we can come and have these conversations in a safe way, manner, in a constructive manner so that we can show other people what they won't be able to see. And for me to share my knowledge in a way that our communities will be able to understand it and process it because the best journalists from the Times and the Post, they're not going to talk to our communities in the way that we do because what they're talking about is not what we need to hear.
Right.
Exactly. Right. Or that it's a both and there's a context, there's a history, there's a familiarity that comes into this. And so just as they bring their whiteness into their work to exclude others, I bring my blackness to this Ukraine experience to include everybody, and that includes Palestinians. And so once we get together and realize that everyone got us divided over some bullshit and we go after the real culprits, we don't realize this racial construct is bullshit that they're using to divide us. We're going to move up on it and they're going to be in trouble. And that's why we need to keep persisting and going on because they are shook and we need to shake them some more.
Amen. Amen. Terrell, I can't thank you enough. I can't thank you enough for the work that you're doing. I can't thank you enough for this conversation and bringing it here to the Damn Digest. And I really I really want to continue having this conversation regularly with you because I think that it is so important. It is so important for people to connect the dots. It's so important for us to recognize the construction that has been put in place by white nationalists to tear us all apart, and that we have to be grounded in the experience that we are having right now, the collective experience that we are having, the collective knowing, in order to be able to win. And the winning looks like collective freedom, right? Without caveats. And I think that the work that you're doing is at the core of that. So please tell people, Terrell, how they can find you, how they can keep up with you, your writing, your work, your podcasts, all of it.
Thank you so much. So first of all, you all want to follow my work on Ukraine, go over to Substack. Well, yeah, we are on Substack. Okay. So Terrell J Star Official is where you can follow me and I can continue my work. If you can afford to be a paid subscriber, please do because I'm over here by myself. I don't have any major media outlets and I'm trying to get at least 1,000 followers for this month because I need to sustain myself over here and I'm doing everything by myself exclusively here. But also, I have a podcast on YouTube, Terrell J Star Official. We're going to start resuming that next week. And also, follow me on my socials Instagram, Blue Sky. I'm not really on Twitter anymore, but I post there. But and Facebook, and I'm Terrell J Star, Terrell Jermaine Star. Jermaine, I'm named after Michael's brother Jermaine. So you want to learn about, yeah, my mama named me after Jermaine. So, yeah, so if you want to learn about not only just international affairs, but my internationalizing my Black experience into it so that we can have this community around how we understand the world, how we can become better human beings, follow all those platforms to start here on Substack and Sis. Thank you so much. Like I said, anytime, like I just want, shout out to you, just one more, just shout out to you specifically. I told you earlier, it was a Black woman that brought me into the room. Um, when I was at the State Department and all these other places, always, y'all, and there are Black women at my HBCU encouraged me to go to Russia. They ain't never going to Russia. Or when I was 20 years old, and they were like, Terrell, you need to go here. There's another Eastern European country. Terrell, go, 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 go. All these people are my number one sources of support and influence because people wonder you grew up in this Black city where how did you get connected to it? They think it's private school or anything like this. No, Black folk who just think that we need more people to be more international, and so that is why I'm here. So thank you specifically for providing your
Absolutely.
platform. It means a lot. It means a lot to me, and I want to do more with you, and other folk. It means a lot to me. Thank you so much.
Amazing. You stay safe and we will talk soon. And I appreciate you so, so very much.
Absolutely.
All right. Bye, my friend. Thank you all for watching. Appreciate you.